Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jen Bolster. I'm an advanced care paramedic in Vancouver. I'm going to be co-hosting the 2019-2020 cardiac arrest report with Nechelle Wall. So to start out the webinar, I'm going to hand it over to Nechelle Wall and Leanne Heppel.
Hi, everybody. We're really happy to have you come to our webinar. We're very excited to share this report with you. And above all, I'm very excited to introduce Leanne Heppel to all of you who haven't yet seen her or met her. She's here to help us kick off this event. Leanne, so would you mind telling us any thoughts you had on the report? Is there anything in particular that stood out to you?
Well, thanks for involving me. The report is excellent. And what really stood out for me is the survivor stories. I think the report did a really good job of bringing to life the voices of the survivors. It was very heartful. And I'm hoping that these stories will highlight the importance of bystander CPR. And I hope that this will inspire others to start bystander CPR.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It really does help provide a voice. And we're actually going to hear from one of the survivors within this report a little later on in the webinar. So exciting. Is there anything else that you'd like to have make a comment on in regards to the report, or any final words you'd like to leave with the paramedics in regards to resuscitation care provided here in BC?
Well, to me, this report really speaks to the evidence-based approach to care that we have here in BCEHS. The report is an excellent opportunity to showcase some amazing patient outcomes. I was so impressed with the survival rates. I mean, these really are the highest survival rates across the country, across the world. Our paramedics are truly delivering world-class resuscitation care. And paramedics and all of our staff should be very proud of the work they do. And this report, I think, is a reminder to all of us about the important work that we do. And really, it's really about how proud the service is and the commitment to excellence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Leanne. I think this is a very inspiring report, and being someone who still responds on the street to these calls, it's great to see the outcomes. Often these calls seem like they often don't have favorable outcomes, but we truly are out there making a difference. And I think that's a very important message to get out there to everybody.
I completely agree. And everyone should be very proud of the work they do every day.
Well, thank you so much, Leanne, for helping me kick off this event. And I hope you enjoy the rest of it, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leanne and Nechelle. Those survivor stories are truly incredible, and what an honor it is to be able to share those with everybody today. So next we have Nechelle, and she will be joining Leanne Baranowski.
Thanks for joining us, Leanne. For those of you who don't know him, Leanne Baranowski is the Interim Director of Clinical and Professional Practice Programs. Leanne, we all like to use the word evidence-based practice, and I think it's something we all try to embody in our practice. However, could you give us a little more insight to what this report may speak to in terms of evidence-based practice, and really what we can kind of glean from that as an organization?
Hey, Nechelle, and hey, everyone. Yeah, sure. I think, firstly, the effort that went into compiling this report and all those involved, kind of a due a huge thanks on my part and Wilson's part as the interim chief medical officer and everyone around the organization. And I think kind of what everyone's really pulled together here is a testament to what happens when each area of the organization stands up and really kind of focuses on one particular area of delivery. And when we talk about evidence-based practice, we don't just mean the clinical practice and the guidelines and the literature that we review to go into the standards of care, but we talk about kind of the evidence in how well we're doing and evidencing our outcomes and evidence and how well our system is performing. And I think what you actually see in this report, and one of the things that I really love about this report, is that this is truly a systems-based approach to cardiac arrest management, out of hospital cardiac arrest management across the whole of British Columbia. And we've got the rural, and we've got the urban, and we've got the various different skill mixes and crew levels, and everyone has a role to play in the care that patients receive. And when we get it right, you can start to see the huge benefits and the outcomes that that patients get to experience and hopefully, which we can see in the case of this report, walk away from with quite a high success rate, and one that's certainly kind of comparative across the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, when we get to see these outcomes and how impressive they are, within this report here, we talk of 600 people that got to return home, and that's something we should all be proud of, and that speaks to the evidence-based approach to practice and how important it is. I agree with you, Leon.
Well, I think highlighting that in the report as well is another kind of favorite piece of mine. We can often get kind of short-sighted and not realize why we're all here and what we're looking to achieve, and ultimately kind of having that grounded and rooted in the cardiac arrest report with that survival story, and one of the kind of key pieces about those stories as well is the chain of survival, and I think that's another kind of testament to how well our system is functioning. We've got the steps that we've been working to put in place for the last 12 to 18 months following the last report, and we've got agencies and responders, all the way from the receipt of the 911 call with the advice that our emergency medical call takers take, all the way through to the decisions around dispatching, the Pulsepoint activation, our FR partners and agencies that support the work that we do as first responders. And then when the paramedics arrive on scene, the different levels of care and the medications and the guidelines that we've kind of been working on to revise and develop with the release of the new CPGs now. It really kind of demonstrates what each part of the organization does and does well to be able to achieve this kind of collective vision around out of hospital cardiac arrest management.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It is like it's such a big approach to care, and it's multifactorial, and it speaks to when we can work in concert with one another and we can all do our jobs well. So
yeah, and some of the big benefits that we'll start to see from this report as well, looking at the information that now rests within the Siren system, we can truly now start to harness that rich data source. And Jennie Helmer will be speaking about that as the BCEHS research lead, and the partnerships that we've got with CanRock, and the partnerships and the research studies that we're starting to kind of go down now with the various different trials that have been led within our system, largest system across Canada. And that's because of the one system approach and the kind of expertise and the dedication of our paramedics and their professionalism and their approach to providing this type of level of care.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, not only are we really embodying evidence-based practice, we're at a point where we're really adding to the evidence behind cardiac arrest. And I think that's a really key message. And I want people to know that.
Well, and not just know it, they can, they're participating as paramedics and as employees within the organization, and many people are pursuing their undergraduate or their postgraduate studies, and they're driving these research trials. And I think our team within clinical medical programs and the paramedic practice leaders, we're all passionate about this. We're all passionate about the patient experience and the patient's journey, and how kind of our decisions and our kind of care and the guidelines factor in and weigh into all of this, and been able to create a system that enables these opportunities for paramedics within them to have a say, to drive practice, to lead practice, but also kind of look at system improvements across all of these different kind of areas. I think is something that everyone should really be proud of, and that every single person that attends a cardiac arrest really is kind of playing a huge role in the success of BCEHS.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the key of the report, and that's why we put it on the front page. We're all moving towards improving resuscitation outcomes, every last one of us. So
great. And one thing I really look forward to as well is, producing these reports year on year so that our paramedics can, start to get that feedback loop. We're hearing that they want to know how well we're doing. We're hearing that they want their feedback, or they want their feedback on how well they're doing their chest compressions. Equally, they're wanting feedback on how well patients are doing, post ROSC, and even hopefully survival to discharge. And I think kind of we've now got the mechanisms to really start bringing, all of this out, as you can see in the report, but using this report now as kind of a base standard of expectations that we're going to set ourselves to try and deliver on an annual basis, so that, everyone in this organization can clearly see what they're working towards and what they're contributing to in this. So it's a huge thanks from me, and as I said, the clinical medical programs team and everyone around the organization, and a huge thanks to all the paramedics and responders out there that are providing this type of level of care, and I hope that we can continue to make more improvements and provide that support and that education for you to be able to do so in the future.
Fantastic, Leon. Thank you. And I think you really summed up the importance of evidence-based practice and the fact that we are, in fact, helping put evidence out there for people. So thanks for your time. I appreciate having you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Leon. And I absolutely love that we're talking about evidence-based practice. It truly is the foundation of paramedic practice. So next, Nechelle will be sitting down with Lillian and Edmund. Their story was included in this year's cardiac arrest report, as Lillian was the recipient of the Vitalink Award for performing life-saving CPR on her husband. So take it away, Nechelle.
So I'm here today with Edmund and Lillian. I'm very pleased that they were able to make it to our webinar, as I got to speak with Lillian in the past when we were writing this report, and I found their story to be incredibly touching. So just to give you guys a bit of an overview, Edmund had a cardiac arrest back in early 2019. Lillian performed life-saving CPR on him, and she's received the Vitalink Award. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to them to share a bit of their story with you guys.
First of all, I'd just like to thank the first responders, right from the 911 dispatcher operator who talked me through doing the CPR, to the team that arrived and took over from the CPR that I was doing to bring Edmund back to life. It was a very crazy experience, 1 o'clock in the morning when he had his cardiac arrest. And the dispatcher was so incredible to give me exactly what I had to do to start the CPR. And then she says, well, I've sent the ambulance and the fire trucks. And when I heard the siren coming, I was like, oh, wow, that's so cool. They're really fast. And I guess it really was fast. I think with the way everything happened, they were here within maybe 15 minutes of me making the call. So everything worked out beautifully. They took over, and thanks be to God, they were able to revive Edmund, although it did take a little bit of time. And then everything just worked out to get him down to the hospital. And it was like a movie when we pulled in, because there was this whole team at the hospital doors waiting to get Edmund in, and they just whisked him in. And then the head doctor came in and says, okay, I'll go fire up the cath lab. And Dr. Wood took off and got everything organized. And within an hour of his cardiac arrest, he was actually in the cath lab getting the procedure done. So everything worked beautifully. The paramedics, the fire department, the 911 operator, just thank you everybody. It was wonderful. It worked out beautifully.
Yeah, I find that just so touching to hear you speak to. And I like I said, I found it touching back then, and I'm glad you were able to kind of share that with the rest of the paramedics here. Edmund, my understanding is you stayed in the Vancouver General, I believe?
Yes.
For only 5 days.
I was out on the 5th day, yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible.
And on my own strength. And everybody were so gentle with me. I didn't break my rib cage. I only had bruises in my ribs, and within days that went away too. So not only they saved my life, they were very gentle about it, which is amazing considering the dire situation.
Awesome. And how's life been for you two since then? I'm sure everyone can see you're here, you're talking to us. It appears like you're living good, normal lives. But can you elaborate a little bit on what life's been like since?
Yeah, my life resumed to normal activities quite quickly. I would say the first week or two, we were taking it very easy, not knowing what to expect. Since then, I have just about resumed everything that I usually have been doing, with the exception of strenuous sports. I used to play badminton and I play a little basketball, and mostly I play golf. And when I came out of the hospital, I asked my cardiologist if I should participate in any of those sports. He refused to answer me. So I took the cue that is probably not a good idea. So sorry.
And is that what you did? Took the cue as like, I won't do it, or you're like,
well, I'm postponing them. I still think I should go back to them, because I notice if there is a difference, a noticeable difference, it's my stamina.
Okay.
Yeah, and even for long walks and things like that, my stamina was not anywhere near what it used to be. So I think sometime soon I should try it. Golfing is much milder, so it should be a probably good sport to break back into.
Try out some golfing. I mean, like, it's just incredible that you're able to even consider doing that after a cardiac arrest. So like I said, incredible story you two have. Incredible.
Yeah, when I left the hospital, I was out of it for the first 3 days. If I came to, I didn't remember anything. But on the fourth day, they interviewed me and they told me that I will be out at that time tomorrow, right, which is the fifth day. And I remember clearly, I asked the cardiologist, I said, well, what did I do wrong? She said, nothing. I said, well, what do I need to pay attention? She said, nothing. I said, do I have to observe any diet changes? She said, no. I said, well, then what happened?
I mean, that's a good question. I'd want to know too.
Because I want to know if my life has changed and what I should be thinking about, right?
I think that's what makes your story. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. So she said, no, live your life like you used to, because we could not find any fault with it. And she said, yours is probably genetic.
Yeah. Well, like I said, at the end of the day, it's just an incredible story, incredible all around, from your experience with the paramedics to really how you're able to live your life today. So I thank you again for sharing.
Such an incredible story. The call takers are such a vital part of the chain of survival. And I know I speak for all paramedics when I say that we are so grateful for what they do. And next we will have Nechelle and Richard Armour. They will be giving an overview of the report.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know Richard, he is the newest Heppell to join the team at Clinical and Medical Programs. Richard was also an integral member of this cardiac arrest report, and he's here to give us an overview. So I'll hand it over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Nechelle. So the 2019-20 cardiac arrest report was a really large effort by a number of team members to work through not just BCEHS level data, but also to work with our health authority partners to find out not just how our treatments influence the short-term outcome of the patient, but also how it influenced the long-term outcome of the patient. So in 2019-20, BCEHS paramedics responded to just over 7,100 cases of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest and attempted resuscitation in approximately 3,100 of those. The most common causes, perhaps unsurprisingly for non-attempted resuscitation, were do not resuscitate orders or signs of obvious death. Of the 3,194 patients who had attempted resuscitation, we had an overall survival rate of 19.8%. And in the Utstein category, we had a survival rate of 30.1%. This puts us really on par with some of our international and national partners, which is excellent to see. And when we look into some of the system level factors that contributed to that, we saw a really high level of bystander CPR compared to previous reports at 60% of patients receiving bystander CPR, which was supported by 75% of patients in cardiac arrest being recognized by our emergency medical call takers, which allowed us at a provincial level to have paramedics on scene within a median of 7.5 minutes. Of the patients who were successfully resuscitated, we had approximately 60% who were conveyed to a PCI-capable facility, so a facility capable of advanced post-cardiac arrest care. And we also saw that our CPR metrics are generally very well done by BCEHS paramedics, with some areas that we've identified that we can target some education to within the high-performance CPR program.
Fantastic. That's a lot of information and a great overview, and speaks to like the breadth of this report. It was interesting when you say that we saw how many workable? 3,193?
3,193.
Yeah. And of those, can you speak to the etiology we saw? I thought one thing that was different here was specifically how we saw such an increase in opiate compared to other areas. And I was hoping you could kind of provide a little more insight for everybody on that.
Yeah, approximately 69% of our cases of cardiac arrest were considered to be of cardiac or other unknown causes. But what we found was that 16% of cardiac arrest cases were considered to be the subject of a overdose secondary to substance use. And if we look internationally, that's perhaps unsurprisingly significantly higher than a number of international systems. Generally, we see in most systems an average of approximately 7% of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest cases being caused by drug overdose.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to like the level of ongoing crisis that we still have with the opiate epidemic here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, Richard, for giving us the overview, and we look forward to hearing from you in the Q&A.
Yeah, my pleasure, Nechelle. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. The numbers are truly astounding, but I think it's so important that we shed a light on opioid-related deaths so that we can really start to target more harm reduction strategies. And next, we're going to hear from Nechelle and Jennie Helmer.
So I'm here now with Jennie Helmer. For those of you who do not know her yet or haven't had the pleasure of being introduced, she is a paramedic practice leader with clinical medical programs with BCEHS. She is also the research lead and has been an integral member of this report and building it and really making it all come together and come into fruition. So Jennie, in this report, we hear a lot actually going on between overall survival and Utstein survival. For those who may not know what those terms mean or how they differ from one another, could you provide an insight to that and maybe more of an explanation?
Yep, absolutely. To be really honest, I didn't know what Utstein was either. And a group of us traveled down to Seattle about 6 years ago to go to the Resuscitation Academy. And that was my first introduction to what Utstein is, or Utstein. And it's a standardized benchmark so that we can compare our outcomes to other services. And instinctively, as a paramedic, I think when you walk into a cardiac arrest and you're faced with a patient that was witnessed to go into cardiac arrest and their initial rhythm is shockable, I think instinctively you know that that patient has the best chance at survival. And that really is what Utstein is all about, is identifying those patients. So it's all comers, any cause. It is first rhythm shockable, as I mentioned, and then that arrest needs to be witnessed. And then from there, we measure patient outcomes, so 30-day mortality. Now, that allows us to compare our patient outcomes to other agencies that measure the same way around the world.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of what Utstein really is versus what overall is. You mentioned benchmarking. I, for one, I'm really passionate about benchmarking. I think it is so much more than just giving us a measurement that we can compare against another service, and really starts going into like the meat and bones of quality control. Can you elaborate on that a little for us?
Yeah, you and I have spent lots of time talking about benchmarking. I agree, it's a really neat concept, and it ties into best practice. It ties into evidence-based practice. It ties into quality of care. And essentially, it allows us to identify indicators within certain presentations. So here we're talking about cardiac arrest. And how do we want to measure those? And how do we want to compare them? And when we're not meeting those benchmark standards, what do we need to do in order to get there? So when I mentioned that we traveled down to Seattle to attend the Resuscitation Academy, that's an example of how we are trying to learn about best practice around the world and how then we try to structure our clinical practice guidelines to meet those best practice. And then we can enter into benchmarking conversations with other agencies.
Yeah, it's such a big thing and not easily defined by just its words there. Another thing about benchmarking that I don't know if we all realize is that we benchmark against ourselves. So we look for these patterns and how we're performing and what we can do.
That's right. Yeah. And I think as we've, an important note here is that when we transitioned from paper to electronic patient care recording, that really allowed us to begin to measure performance and allowed us to have really good insight into paramedic practice and where do we want to go with this practice. Because all of a sudden we have this enormous volume of data that is so valuable thanks to paramedics documentation out in the field. And that allows us to essentially create these benchmarks, understand them better, and then track them over time, which of course is the key to everything. And then we can make adjustments as needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, I think I need to give a shout out to Lee, our siren guy, and Sung, who helped us so much with the data for this.
Yeah, and Sung Lee and Anshuman Joshi as well.
Yeah.
Really important.
Absolutely. So I guess then people probably want to know, where do we stand internationally?
Yeah, and this is the exciting piece. Internationally, when we look at our outcomes, and we'll talk about Utstein outcomes, because as we talked about earlier, that is essentially comparing to apples. I think we all recognize that cardiac arrests are subject to a number of variables. So where are you taking that patient? Are you urban? Are you remote? Is your hospital capable of PCI? Do they have a cath lab, et cetera? Mm-hmm. So when we break it down to that patient cohort we mentioned earlier, and we look around the world and we see that King County, Seattle leads with close to 50% Utstein rate, which is impressive. Again, one of the reasons why we really look to that agency to inform our practice and vice versa with them. So to give some context there, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but our own Utstein rate is 45.1, so equally impressive. And then when we look around the world and we go to places like Australia, London, Ireland, and we see their Utstein rates hovering around 39%, for Ambulance Victoria and 36.9% for NHS London. Again, we see that we have really great outcomes. New South Wales and Ireland are both around 30%, to give some context there. So we've come a long way. For paramedics that are watching this, you should feel proud that your outcomes are so high. This is a direct correlation to your treatment and care for patients. And this is really an important piece, I think, for paramedics to understand how we position ourselves in the global world of cardiac arrest and resuscitation. So really well done. Yeah, no, 100% could not agree anymore with what you're saying. I think the one thing maybe we'll clarify is we have a Utstein survival of 30.1% and a 45% Utstein ROSC. Yes. Yeah. Good. But 45%, 2022, here we come. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do we want to clarify what we mean by that, just so we're not causing confusion? Yeah, because it's something we report on. So this is a great opportunity to clarify Utstein ROSC now. Why did we even say that? So I'll let you do that. Okay, I'll make it brief. But we know that transporting patients to hospital is one measure, and that is really what we're measuring with Utstein ROSC. Yeah. When we're talking about outcomes, it really depends on where we're transporting those patients to. Yeah. And when we say Utstein ROSC or overall ROSC, we really do mean ROSC that was sustained to ED, not transient ROSC. So yeah, there's really many different things that we report and look at. So yeah. Awesome.
So Jennie, I guess before I let you go here and you join the QA, you're the research leader, or research lead, I should say. So do you have any exciting updates you can provide us all with in terms of resuscitation research that's ongoing or to look forward to?
Yeah. How lucky are we that we have this amazing relationship with CanRock? They're now called Resurrect, but CanRock has engaged with us in research now for a number of years. And I think lots of watchers will have engaged in some of those research projects, like ALPS, for example. One that we have running right now, and it's silent, it's in the background really, is Pulsepoint. So that's looking at evaluating bystander CPR and cardiac arrest for those people that have an app on their phone. So if you have that app, if you're a bystander and you have that app on your phone and you're within 400 meters of a public cardiac arrest, then you'll be notified to go. So that's really evaluating the effect of bystander CPR on outcomes. This is the first time that's really been looked at. We think bystander CPR is a huge determinant of outcomes, but this will help prove that. We also have a study called Educate, which is really exciting as well. And interestingly, this attention shifts from out in the field to dispatcher and call taker recognition of CPR. And the reason that that is so important is that in our system, especially where we have a 911 system and a call taker picking up the phone, their ability to recognize cardiac arrest immediately really changes the outcomes for those patients. And here in BC, we have an excellent service. So we are able to recognize cardiac arrest early and initiate bystander CPR. So the Educate study looks at that. It supports call takers and dispatchers in recognizing agonal breathing. And it will look at data from 1 year prior, introduce an education component, and then look at data 1 year following that education component around the recognition of agonal breathing. So that'll be a really, really interesting insight into our system. We also have Epidose, which is coming down the pipe in the new year. And that is looking at high dose versus low dose epi in cardiac arrest. And that's a multi-center randomized control study. So it's huge. And I think we all know how much information and opinion and different schools of thought there are around epi. So, to truly understand the effects of epi on cardiac arrest, we have to study it and we have to spend more time looking at it and understanding the effects of it. So those are three, I would say, of really, really key cardiac arrest studies that are either happening right now or coming down.
Yeah, I'm excited about all of them for one. I think it was just interesting hearing from Richard about our current call taker recognition rates, which are, I think, quite admirable. And I've always believed the verdict's still out for epi. So let's see if we can find some answers and to be able to participate in as part of a multi-center. It speaks to like how integrated we're becoming into like paramedicine as a whole and moving paramedicine research forward. So it's all very exciting.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it really comes down to paramedics, dispatchers, call takers participating in the research, and none of this is possible without you doing that. So thanks for your participation. Always any questions, thoughts, comments around research, I'm always available to chat.
Yeah. And I can clarify, she is not lying when she says that. She is available. So awesome. Thank you so much for coming, Jennie. And we look forward to having you in the Q&A soon.
Thank you. Looking forward.
Thanks, Jennie and Nechelle. I know we'll all be very excited to see the same level of passion directed at all of your future research endeavors. And next, we're going to be hearing from John Deakin.
Hi, John. Thanks for coming. We're really excited you could be here. So I'm just going to take a minute to introduce you to anyone who hasn't yet had the chance to meet you. You're a paramedic practice leader with clinical medical programs, and you hold the resuscitation portfolio. Having said that, you also hold many other portfolios, and I think this makes you the perfect candidate to talk to us about some of the COVID-19 changes we saw within this report.
Yeah, thanks, Nechelle. So there were some minor changes during the COVID with respect to resuscitation and cardiac arrest management. And these changes were made around the obvious concerns with AGMPs. And because so much of this was new to the hospital and the out-of-hospital environment, much of the information was based on expert opinion because that evidence base just simply wasn't there. So the real focus around resuscitation was maintaining the highest level of patient care we can, and providing the same level of care we can, but also keeping our paramedics and caregivers safe during the resuscitation. So that meant making some minor changes, like we went from a continuous chest compression approach to 30 and 2, and that allowed us to, of course, take that pause for ventilation and minimize the potential for aerosol generation in an attempt to keep everybody a little bit safer during COVID.
Yeah, no, 100%. That was an ever evolving situation. And it still is. It's going to be interesting to see years from now kind of what we can glean from this in terms of COVID-19 and the effects it had on all different clinical presentations, as well as paramedic safety and hospital staff safety. Having said that, we did see some changes in the cardiac arrest report in terms of length of pauses and in terms of the duration of pauses. However, I find it quite interesting that we didn't really see a lot of change in outcome. We have to continue to monitor that and the evolution of it to really find out what the effects COVID-19 had on our resuscitation care. So
yeah, and you said that magic word, monitoring, and Nechelle, it's all about quality improvement and quality assurance. We, as we make any changes, whether they're related to COVID or not, we need to measure those changes to see if we are improving and if we are making a difference to outcomes. So we continually monitor we have these key performance indicators around resuscitation. Mm-hmm. And we do watch them very closely to see that, monitor that any changes that we're making are what the effect is on patient outcomes to that. And you're absolutely right. We did see some minor changes with respect to pauses in CPR and to the initial onset of resuscitation due to donning PPE and things of that nature. But despite that, we didn't see any changes in outcomes in cardiac arrest management.
Yeah, no, it was interesting, definitely interesting. So John, you also have been an advanced care paramedic for 21 years. Having said that, you have a great amount of experience in cardiac arrest resuscitation, I could assume. How has it changed over the years? Can you give us any insight into your personal experience?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Nechelle, and it has changed dramatically. I mean, through my career, that this is probably the area where I've seen the greatest degree of change. Now, early in my career, the focus on cardiac arrest management was really all about advanced care. And it was about advanced intubation, advanced airway management. It was about antiarrhythmic drugs and getting that monitor on. And
everything we don't do these days.
Everything we don't do these days. And what we didn't realize is we were doing everything wrong. We were pausing chest compressions so we could get a good look at the monitor and see what rhythm we were in. And what we know now is that the focus really needs to be on that basic, that primary care, those basic interventions, which are critically important. And those are the things that truly affect outcomes and truly improve patient outcomes. So, and we're talking about early recognition. First, we need to know that person is actually in cardiac arrest, and then early CPR, and not just early CPR, but high performance or high quality CPR is very important, like hands on the chest, and then early defibrillation. So these are the things that truly affect the outcomes and improve the outcomes. And this is where the entire focus has shifted from that advanced care to that primary care model. And this is where we're really seeing an improvement in the outcomes.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think moving forward, like community engagement and getting involved in like how do we disseminate this information? How do we get involved in teaching within communities potentially, or partner with different services who can provide that training and teaching to bystanders? We heard earlier from one of our survivors and his wife, and I think that's just that story wraps it all up. The importance of bystanders as well getting involved in doing CPR. So
yeah, and that's exactly where we need to go. So we know where we've come from, and we know how to improve outcomes with respect to cardiac arrest, and that's where we need to go now. So what we really need, as you pointed out, is community engagement. So we need more AEDs. We need, they should be in businesses, it should be in residences, apartment buildings, things of that nature. So easier access to AEDs, more CPR awareness and education. So perhaps mandating CPR training in schools, something along those lines. Have more people trained in high performance CPR, and also focus on not just the urban areas, but rural and remote, where perhaps our response times are a little bit slower than they are in a dense populated area, and really engaging those communities for CPR awareness, CPR training, and more AEDs within the community.
It's really kind of taking it back from kind of where you were saying when you first started. When we look at the chain of survival, you would have kind of started at the top. We want the advanced life support, we want these interventions, we want them now. And we're seeing that move kind of down now and stuff. And we're saying, well, what's important? And it's recognition. And we saw from Richard's story, we have great call taker recognized cardiac arrest. And I think that's going to help definitely improving bystander CPR. And I just think it's so interesting to kind of hear, where you started compared to where I've started. That was not something we were trained. We were trained very much in the importance of the basic life support components, the good quality CPR, early defibrillation. It kind of makes me wonder what I'm going to look back on in 20 years.
Yeah, I think these are exciting times because we now that we know what affects the outcomes, we can make those changes. And these aren't big changes to make. They're fairly straightforward, and it'll have a dramatic outcome on the people within the community.
And I think another big thing this really speaks to is every last one of us at any license level has a huge impact on our patients, and it's just those performance of the basic skills. So
yep, absolutely. It comes down to the basics. That's what makes the difference.
Totally. Well, John, thank you for coming, and we look forward to having you in the Q&A period.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Nechelle.
Thanks, John. It was so great to hear from all of our paramedic practice leaders regarding the 2019-2020 cardiac arrest report. And now we are going to move into our Q&A session. So feel free to ask any and all questions that you have, and our lovely paramedic practice leaders will answer them.
Oh, I can probably take the first question that's been asked in the Q&A and then maybe hand it back to you, Jenny, and you can correct whatever I say wrong. So the first question comes from an anonymous attendee who asks, it's really interesting to hear about the high dose, low dose epi trial. Wondering how the 2018 Paramedic 2 trial will be integrated this, or the results from that trial will impact this new one. So it's an excellent question. Obviously Paramedic 2 being probably one of the landmark trials of epi or adrenaline in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, comparing placebo with adrenaline. What we're looking at in terms of the results from Paramedic 2 was that whilst the administration of epi or adrenaline seemed to improve survival, it didn't really improve the patient-oriented outcome of neurological outcome at discharge. And what the hypothesis seems to be at the moment is there's potentially a sweet spot that we haven't identified with the use of adrenaline or epi in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, where we get the benefits from epi, but we also don't have the disastrous neurological outcome of high dose epi, where the higher the dose of epi, the worse the blood flow to the brain. So really what the kind of Epidose 2 is trying to answer is do we get the same benefit in survival with a lower dose of epinephrine, but with a better neurological outcome? Or is it just blanket that any use of adrenaline might improve survival, but at the expense of neurological outcome? So really great question. Essentially, this trial is trying to answer one of the questions that came out of the Paramedic 2 trial.
Yeah, not too much to add there, Richard. I think that's a very fulsome answer. Epidose is likely to start in the new year, depending, of course, on the lay of the land. And there'll be lots of information provided, education, et cetera, around how that will roll out and what the specific inclusion criteria will be, et cetera. But essentially, it is looking at low dose versus standard dose, which is distinctly different from Paramedic 2. and might just help to fill in some of the gaps around what we know about epi right now.
So another question here from Lawrence Darlington. How will this report affect BCEHS strategy, both for operations, clinical, and learning? So I can answer part of that, and potentially Jennie and John will be able to provide some more background, but certainly from learning, from the learning perspective and clinical perspective, is what we've identified in the report, and particularly looking at the section on quality of CPR that we're delivering, is a number of key areas where BCEHS, EMRs, and paramedics are doing an excellent job of on-scene resuscitation, but a number of areas where potentially if we make some small gains, particularly around reducing the number of pauses greater than 10 seconds, as well as reducing the average length of pauses in chest compressions, where we might be able to make some incremental gains in terms of survival. And so from our perspective, we did originally have a high performance CPR program developed and ready to roll out literally in the days before COVID arrived on Canadian shores. And so we're really looking forward to using the lessons we're learning from the 2019-20 report, as well as the 2020-21 report, to really inform the key pieces that we need to be working on in terms of the learning for staff in general.
Yeah, Richard, I don't have much to add to that. I think it was a great summary and a great question from Jake. You know, that's really one of the main focuses of these reports, is to measure and improve, and that's one of the mantras of the Resuscitation Academy in Seattle. It's just to constantly measure. So until we can look at what we're doing and where we need to improve, we can't really improve. So, you know, to answer your question, Jake, yeah, this is going to shape, these types of reports will shape operations, clinical education, looking at where those gaps are, looking at where we can improve, targeting and focusing education on that, but with the type of education and where that education will be delivered, as well as working with our senior leadership on from the operations component.
Nothing to add from me there, Richard. But maybe I'll just start a bit of an answer there for Sean's question around advertising for Bystander Cpr. And John's been working on this, so may have some pieces to add. We meet regularly with Heart and Stroke Foundation and CanRock/Resurrect, as mentioned earlier. And they are really the publicly facing organizations, and so we support them. And I think the question around would this be a good use of funds to you know, work on advertising how important that bystander CPR piece is? Absolutely. And I think there's a fair amount of energy and time that go into this through Heart and Stroke, and as well, as I mentioned, John sits on that committee along with Dr. Jim Christensen and Dr. Brian Grinnell, and the intertwining of all of our agencies and our work together, I think it is starting to make some impact on bystanders.
So interesting question here from Shauna around whether there's a discernible difference between outcomes on mechanical versus manual CPR. And I think really if we look at the time that the 2019-20 cardiac arrest report was generated, we were not using mechanical CPR as much as we are now with the COVID pandemic. At the time of the report, the use of mechanical CPR was really predominantly restricted to patients being enrolled in the ECMO study at St. Paul's right up until basically the end of this reporting period. So it's something we'll definitely be looking into in the next cardiac arrest report, is to look at how mechanical CPR is being used within our service. Certainly a lot of research and a recent study in, I believe it was the Western Journal of Emergency Medicine, again confirming that, you know, if there are enough responders, that there's no fatigue. And if it's in a high performing system, that manual CPR is just as good and probably better than mechanical CPR. So it's something we'll be looking to from our system lens in the next cardiac arrest report.
Thanks, Richard. And I'd just like to add to that too, because this question comes up a lot regarding mechanical CPR. And I think one of the issues when we talk about mechanical CPR is a lot of the studies and the research are focused around cardiac arrest outcomes. Is it or is it not better in cardiac arrest outcomes? And it really isn't that simple in an out-of-hospital environment. There's many more things outside of the realm of a research study that we need to factor in. And you touched on some of them, like the fatigue of the person providing the chest impressions. So is it a targeted system? Is it a layered system? Are there first responders on this? Are we talking rural, remote? What are the transport times? What are the safety considerations for the paramedics performing CPR? Are they calling these arrests on scene, or are they transporting? What percentage of patients are they transporting? Like this, there's so many moving parts to this question that I think we need to look at from a pre-hospital or out-of-hospital perspective. It's not just about outcomes, it's about paramedic safety and about improving the working environment for paramedics when they're involved in resuscitation.
So Dylan, excellent and long question. So I will work through it as best I can. So Dylan's question is regarding ongoing education, training, and continuing competence for BCEHS paramedics in cardiac arrest management. So what is the current industry standard for paramedics with respect to ongoing continuing competence in cardiac arrest management? Does BCEHS support some form of clinical education in terms of ongoing maintenance of competency in cardiac arrest management? For example, our provincial critical care teams very rarely encounter working cardiac arrests in the field. However, when we do, it represents a high stakes halo event for which we receive zero ongoing CME. And I think that's an excellent point, Dylan, is, you know, the management of cardiac arrest is not a one and done training piece. It's really a dedication to excellence in every component, including the ongoing education of paramedics. And this is certainly part of the high performance CPR approach that we're looking to take with the launch of the high performance CPR training. We initially started probably a couple of years ago now sending out CPR feedback reports. We are now looking towards how we can better utilize those reports to support ongoing education opportunities for paramedics in terms of cardiac arrest management. And we are looking at how we can integrate the high performance CPR training into regular parts of our CPD days with BCEHS learning. One of the things about the high performance CPR training that was developed as well, which I think is a really exciting development, was that the training was developed for everyone involved in the management of the cardiac arrest, and it included even our first responder partners in fire departments or other first responder agencies, and it extended right up to our critical care paramedics in terms of the content applicability. And so it's definitely something we're working towards in terms of the maintenance of competence and making sure paramedics are comfortable, particularly when they're working in units that don't have a high rate of cardiac arrests.
Great questions, everybody. Thank you. I think Lawrence Darlington has a couple of questions, and maybe I'll sort of half answer both of them and then hand it back to Richard and John. But the first one, are you able to retrospectively analyze data from Pcrs to compare the efficacy of different treatments, drugs, airways, etc.? Yes, we can, but more do we right now? No, we don't. So will we do that in the future? I think it's an excellent question. It takes some skill and expertise to do this, and for the longest, historically, I would say we've really relied on our relationship with CanRock to do this work and to share this back with us, and it has been a really strong way of getting excellent statistical analysis of our work. So I think the short answer is we're not doing it ourselves right now. We do work with CanRock to get that data back to us, and we'll carry on doing that. As we grow and we mature as an organization, I think we'll be able to do some of this ourselves. And that's, likely down the road a little bit, but just to keep that door open, it is really important that we do that, and that we understand at that level what our data looks like. So I hope that answers at least some of the question. And then the second question you have there is to build upon Shauna's question, will EPCR be around mechanical CPR be included in Siren? And I think we can put that through in a conversation in the next Siren sprint for sure. It's an excellent suggestion. And then John, there's a question, the second half of Lawrence's question around the Airways 2 study. It's just disappeared off my screen, but John, if you wanted to answer that piece, or Richard.
Sure, I can touch on that, and it's disappeared off my screen too, but I think it was, are we able to retrospectively look at EPCRs to look at some of the data and compared to some of the larger RCTs that are out there? And the answer is yes, absolutely, and we have done that. We did that during COVID when we changed our airway practices around intubation, and we went to iGels. Again, we need to make sure that this is keeping paramedics safe, and also is it really the best patient care. So we looked at not only the outcomes of cardiac arrest, and that's really what the Airways 2 trial did, was looking at cardiac arrest outcomes with intubation versus using a second generation supraglottic airway, which is the iGel. And they didn't find any change, any measurable change to the outcomes in cardiac arrest. What the Airways 2 trial didn't look at was efficacy of airway management, the efficacy of the iGel versus intubation. So this is one of the things that we did take a very close look at. We did a PCR review, an extensive review, and we looked at all the parameters, key performance indicators, adverse events around airway management, both cardiac arrest and non-cardiac arrest, and we looked very closely at that. And we're actually working on a paper right now to release some of our findings. So the short answer is yes, we do retrospectively look at this data and look at how we can improve moving forward.
The only other quick thing I want to quickly jump in with is around the collection of mechanical CPR. Just want to note that in the SARC for CPR or chest compressions within Siren, so the additional information, we do have the option for ticking mechanical CPR. So if mechanical CPR is applied by our paramedics, or if it's applied by first responders prior to arriving, please do make sure to use that SARC section to record that mechanical CPR was used in that case, and at what time in the cardiac arrest that mechanical CPR was applied. So another one here from Anonymous is recently heard from learning that continuous chest compression with an advanced airway in situ would not be returning to clinical practice following the end of the pandemic. Is this correct? And do you have the numbers available to provide an explanation regarding this decision? From my perspective, and John is possibly better positioned to answer this question, but at this stage, given the continuing high rates of COVID-19 in the province, as much as we would love the pandemic to be over tomorrow, it looks like it will continue for a while. So the official decisions around what our post-pandemic clinical practice looks like have not been finalized at all. But John can potentially speak a bit more to that.
Yeah, well said, Richard. I mean, my first question is what is the end of the pandemic? And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But to answer your question, continuous chest compressions will not be returning to clinical practice. So no, there hasn't been any discussion around that. Assuming that there is, if we were to say that there's going to be an end to this pandemic and have a reasonable time frame for that, are we going to continue with our current standard practice? No, we haven't even discussed that. There's no reason at all why we wouldn't return to continuous chest compressions with an advanced airway in. So I think, first of all, this is a rumor. There hasn't been any discussion around this. But I completely agree with Richard. You know, there is really no end in sight to this pandemic in the near future, which means that the current practice will remain in place until we're completely out of the woods and we can safely return to our previous practice.
Lawrence with all the questions. So this is a great report and highlights high quality provincial care from BCEHS. Has it been publicly released to the media for reporting? So that does remain our plan. At the moment, we are working with the communications team who are led by the excellent Leslie Pritchard. And we are working towards getting the report available for public consumption so that the members of the public can know how well they're being served by everyone who's working for BCEHS and providing care, and including every piece of the chain, including the call takers, the dispatchers, not just the responders who arrive on the scene and who the public really spends some time with. So we are working towards making sure the public does get that information around how well everyone's doing.
Great, thank you everyone. If no one has any further questions, we will wrap up the webinar for today, but we appreciate all of your attendance and all the great questions brought forward. A recording will be available later for everyone to view, as well as those who did not get the chance to come live. Thanks again from the team. We appreciated having you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nechelle. Thanks, Jen. Phenomenal presentation.
Thanks, everyone. Please do reach out to clinicalpractice@bchs.ca. Any questions? I think there's one last one that someone's put in. Is EPI study going to include time of administration? Yeah, we'll be looking at that variable as well in terms of how that impacts outcomes.
Great. Well, have a good rest of your day, everyone, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you.